Today we are going to start the process of educating our vision. It seems rather interesting that in the secret services they take men into a room, and as these men go into the room they have no idea what they will find, that is, what objects they will find. They are only in the room perhaps for 30 seconds or 1 minute, or perhaps even less in some cases, depending on the type of examination. And then they are asked to go into another room in which there is nothing but a desk, a chair, and a piece of paper and pencil, and to write their impressions. They will say, there is a desk and a calendar. There exists in this room, on the desk, a pencil, a fountain pen, a blotter. There's a picture of an elderly lady. There's a picture of a young child. And then they'll go on and they'll describe the various objects that may be there. Now, as they score, so are they judged from the standpoint of educating the vision. Have you ever had a person meet you on the street and notice that you were there and then later tell you, I saw you there? You say, I didn't see you, indicating that you were not thoroughly alert, or you were distracted, and certainly understandably so in many cases. But yet at the same time, others seem to possess a more total awareness of their environment, a more total awareness of the conditions that are around them. I suspect that to find an actual normal pattern is a little bit difficult, because people will vary very much in their apprehension of what is going on around them. So educating the vision is a process. I think the first step here too must be awareness that the vision needs to be educated. In other words, we need to be able to examine life. Now, it may seem to us that externals do not count, but when you pause to consider that the noticing of objects around you in the physical realm can be coupled to the astral realm, to the realm of the mind, to the realm of the memory, and to the spiritual realm, then it becomes more important. It seems that as we educate our vision below, so we also educate our vision above. Because, like Mary's little lamb that followed her to school one day, it seems that what we do down here does count up there. And so I ask you today to bear with me in the realization that the education of the vision is of vast importance. Someone said recently in a textbook that the world was phony, that it was shoddy, that it was twisted in space, that it was full of sentimentality and devices that were inaccurate. I am not giving a direct quote, but I am giving a semi-quote on the work of Georges Kepes, which deals with the education of the vision. And I think this is particularly significant. It would have been quite easy for me to have read, actually, from the book that he wrote on the education of vision. But I believe that we want to synthesize a bit differently than what he did. Certainly not entirely in the intellectual vein. I mean, we could, if we would, make it purely a matter of intellectuality. We want it to be a matter of practicality, something extremely useful. I don't imply that he was completely impractical. I think he was very wise, and is very wise. But I want to point out to each person here that the development of the education of the vision is a very important development in itself. As above, so below is the old Hermetic axiom. So what we do down here does have a way of counting up there. People sometimes think they can literally fool themselves. In other words, they can fool God. I think probably one of the biggest problems in educating the vision is a feeling of hopelessness because of the vastness of everything. Life at times seems so complex. Complexities have a tendency to make us shun identification. And this itself is an error. We have eyes, but see not. Isn't that what Jesus said? He said, you have eyes, but you see not. We look for someone's toupee or on superficial things. These are rather meaningless. The society in which we live today has all sorts of devices. Yet, in the time of Marie Antoinette, they also had their devices. We sometimes forget this. In the time of ancient Egypt, we were discussing early this morning, not with a group, but amongst ourselves, about the powdered wigs that are worn by English judges. You know, it used to be the custom here in America for many of the menfolk to wear white powdered wigs. Back in the time of George Washington, these were very distinguished. We haven't yet had a style change in this time of great change that relates to that. I mean, we look at them in pictures, and we have adapted many other styles that really go back many years ago. And right now, we're more or less adopting the wider necktie. One of the men was telling me that he stopped at a very famous store in the California area, and he tried to buy a little narrow tie to which he was accustomed. And he found that he couldn't buy one. And he said, is there anything I can do about it? And I said, well, hardly. I said, the trend is now toward wide ties, and you have little choice really in the matter. And the same is true and does apply to women's dresses and many other articles of clothing. So we educate our vision, but many times we find that we can't do anything about it because of the fact that someone else makes up our minds for us ahead of time. The stylists in Paris or somewhere decide that we're going to look so and so we look that way. We marveled at the fact that in England, and this has a little to do with the education of vision too, we marveled that in England they were developing what I have termed witchcraft shoes, I think 3 years ago when we were in London. In other words, they were very similar to Salem back in the time of New England and the New England witchcraft trials. And I said to my wife as we looked in some of the shop windows, aren't they ugly looking? She said, yes, I will never wear them. Well, they're on their way now over here, and they're beginning to appear in our shops because we're somewhat behind England, you see, in all the things that we do. We took particular note when we were in England and in various places in our travels. We have always tried to see as much as we can, and yet I know there's a lot that we don't see. But I have often concluded that when you're traveling abroad, that you see a great deal more than you see at home. And then I have asked myself why. And it is because primarily we have an awareness that we fail to actually possess in a familiar area. In other words, in your own home, you often don't see changes because the area is so familiar to you that you utterly ignore it. Now comes an important point. We, in my opinion, have a responsibility to be observant people. The power of observation can save us from poisoning. You know what happened to my wife recently? She drank a whole glass of Basic H. Well, she didn't see the colorless Basic H in the cup. And so our insides were gurgling for quite some time with Basic H. Now, what is the value of educating the vision? Of course, you can't always guard against something you don't see, but you can try to remember where you put everything to the best of your ability unless someone else comes along and literally substitutes, you see, which occasionally will happen. The education of the vision, however, is a practical gift because it will help you to dress well, it will help you to think well, It will help you to make those observations that you ought to make about yourself and about others. But avoid stereotypes in educating your vision. What are stereotypes? Well, people will look at someone and say, this person looks like my Aunt Mamie, therefore it is my Aunt Mamie in effect, and my Aunt Mamie thinks this way. And therefore this person must think this way. This is completely wrong, but it's one of the errors that we're prone to fall into, is looking at people and making up our mind about them. In a way, when we make up our mind about another person, we have a tendency to literally put an iron kimono around them. It's an iron kimono of our thoughts. See, we make up our mind about someone else, and the first thing you know, our rigidities are their experiences. And they say, I wonder what the struggle is. Now, you probably all notice that I don't stutter. Yet several years ago, I had an employer, many years ago, by the name of Mr. Wright. He was never wrong. Well, Mr. Wright was a very distinguished gentleman, and he had a way of projecting certain ideas out of his own mind about his employees. This one was efficient, this one was inefficient, this one was a kook, this one was wise. And he had a very, very strong mind. So whenever I would come near him, the auric emanation from him would cause me to have terrible feelings of inferiority owing to his opinion of me. Now take notice of this. At that time I was not so much aware of the observations of other people. In other words, I knew my own observations. I didn't stop to think that someone else's thought could actually hurt me. But I now find that it can. And therefore we ought to take the fullest measures of protecting ourselves, not against specific people so much, but against the general public, and even sometimes against misunderstanding people, by utilizing the tube of light around ourselves to neutralize their thoughts in the force field or aura of ourselves. Because you see, these little fleas of thought, they jump from one aura to the other. We call it contagion. I call it psychic contagion. And if we have an educated vision, we are able to save ourselves a great deal of trouble. An educated vision may not always be able to protect itself against the insidious, invisible elements that sometimes are there to either poison us or regurgitate inside of us or give us indigestion. But most of the facts of life are visible to us. We do have, in most cases, some kind of a warning about them. And I want our people, and I know the masters do too, I want our people to be the best educated people, the wisest people on the planet. Wise in the sense that you are harmless as doves, but wise as serpents. In other words, certainly God is harmless, and He is purely interested in our good. People would be too if they would deeply imbibe of the cup of reality. But unfortunately they don't, until they come to a point where they are properly educated in a spiritual way. We then must take the steps to protect ourselves, and there is absolutely nothing wrong in doing it. Jesus did it all the time, and He was quite aware. Who touched me? For I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. Master, how can you say someone touched you when the people are all around you? Nay, but I perceive that someone has touched me. Well, why didn't He name the person? He didn't seem to know who had touched Him. And then tremblingly forth from the multitude comes the woman. She says, it was I, Lord. I touched you. And I was healed. I've gone to doctors. I've had an issue of blood for 12 years. And now it's all dried up. Instantly, by the power of your radiation, the power of your aura, the power of your healing. She had an educated vision. She saw that the Master was there. She saw that the power of God was there. She knew that if she but touched His aura, the hem of His garment, that the energy would flow. And so she had awareness. And awareness is a part of educating our vision. Awareness of ourselves, certainly, but awareness also of God's grace. Awareness of other people who do not always function in God's grace. Let's not develop a hostility toward them. Let's have compassion toward them. There, but for the grace of God, go I. All of us would be in darkness were it not for the light. And therefore, in gratitude to the light, we must become the more efficient servant of God. Certainly, we must not become less efficient with the passing of the years. And we have a proneness to it, because with the aging process, people get older and they say to themselves, well, now I'm older and wiser but less efficient, and it is so. I have seen, quite marvelously, the manifestation of great efficiency in older people, sometimes of far greater efficiency than you would expect. It is an efficiency that belies their years, because they have developed an educated vision of themselves. They quite naturally unfold these faculties that I'm talking about. The faculties of the soul, latent in most of us, are more developed in many of them, but not of necessity because of the aging process, but by contraindications, because of the renewal process. They are being developed to think spiritually, and in this spiritual thought, they are able to manifest the spiritual power. And the spiritual power is efficacious in our lives if we let it flow. It is we who dam up the power of the educated vision, because in a way it is the fingers of light within God or ourselves, as the case may be, that are examining the anomalies of life. And as we examine these various faces of identity, we say, what is this? What is that? And we identify it, and we say, this is good, that is evil. And we think that because we denote the individualities that we have the answer. Jesus applied it by saying, search the Scriptures, for in them ye think ye find eternal life, and they are they which testify of me. But let us understand that what we really want is the actuality of what the person is in the depth of their soul, not what they seem to be. We want to learn to become that which is real or actual. I should say actual because I denote actuality as that which is. Perhaps I should define it, and then throughout this entire conference we'll think a little better about it. To me, an actuality is that which is and is immutable. It cannot be changed. It is a condition. A reality is that which we think is a certain condition, but which isn't the condition of necessity that we think it is. Our realities may become actualities or may be actualities, but they are not of necessity actualities. Do you understand me, or am I going too fast? What I'm trying to say is that we must really understand the syllogistic reasoning. We all have and use the deductive reasoning. We also use inductive reasoning. And sometimes we complete our syllogism. We examine life through logic. This in itself is one way that seems right unto a man, and the end thereof is death. Because we also ought to utilize the faculties of the inner man and learn to reach out with the inner man to verify what seems is our outer logic. This is the educating of the vision of man from the inward standpoint. Now, I have personally, again and again, utilized the inner eyes of the mind. And then sometimes I've been St. Peter on the waves, and Jesus has reached out his hand and said, come on up again. I know you'll do better the next time. I don't think that it's wrong to make a mistake. That is how you learn. Now, a lot of us, of course, like to relate to the human. We like to relate to human opulence. We think that this is the answer to everything. I say it is half the answer and no more. It isn't even half the answer, but I'll give it credit, to say it's half the answer if you want to make it that way, arbitrarily. Actually, what I really think is that all of our opinions, all of our knowledge, all of our thoughts are really a very small segment of what is real. But they are a small segment. And there is a great deal to be discovered. There's a great deal that lies behind the screen of the visible. We then as individuals are really on a great caravan or grand adventure. We're on an adventure of great discovery. It's almost giant discovery. But we don't realize it because we have a condition called humdrum or boredom. And humdrum and boredom is with us every single day that we live as the enemy of our life. You heard me speak about Tiamat. Well, let me assure you that chaos is always trying to invade order. And so, when I speak of educating the vision, I realize there are contra-forces. I think there are contra-forces in every case. But those men and women of vision are truly able to rise above the contra-forces until they can become what they want to become in spite of the opposition. That is the answer. It's in spite of the opposition that we encounter. Anybody can say, oh yes, there's so much opposition to this project, or to my going, or to my becoming this. I don't know, I just don't feel that I can overcome. Can I really overcome? I don't think so. Somehow or other, the problem is too great. Or they try the wrong approach. Well, let's try another one, if one doesn't work, until we have succeeded. I remember my mother, and she used to say, if at first we don't succeed, and this wasn't original with her, she'd say, try again, you'll succeed at last. And I think that it is a very valid consideration to give in the education of our vision. The education of our vision is really the education of ourselves. Remember what Jesus and the great masters have thought on this. Without vision, the people perish. And therefore, it is vision that we need. And let the boredom come. Let the humdrum conditions come. It requires a turn of the mind to say this is a grand adventure, this business of living. And it is a matter of our letting into our consciousness what is real, what is actual. I'm going to correct that now. What is actual? It is really a matter then of shedding our realities that are not actualities. Do you see the point? In other words, let's get rid of the conditions that are merely a chimera. We go ahead and manufacture these mirages constantly because it's the nature of man to have imagination. In the Holy Bible, it speaks of how now the imaginations of men have become very great, and nothing will be impossible unto them, the Lord said. So let me go down now and let us confound the speech of men that they will not be able to understand one another. And so the Tower of Babel experience occurred. This, of course, was an understandable interference by the great masters at a time when civilization was indeed multiplying and replenishing the earth. But they were multiplying and replenishing the wrong kind of concepts upon the earth. And therefore the wise power of the masters reached out and divided them and scattered them. And the confusion of language occurred. Now today, because of it, we all have to communicate with foreigners, and they seem very proficient in some cases, and I mean no offense to anyone. They seem very proficient and able to communicate with us, but they never seem to understand us unless they wish to. You know what I mean? How they can say, I'm sorry, I don't speak the English. But they'll understand you in a business deal and come out not second best, but first best in most cases. And then you turn around and find out, like I did one time, and I'm meaning no offense to Canada when I say this, because we have many good members there, but I was up among the French Canadians one time and I asked the road directions, and I couldn't speak French at the time very well, and so I naturally asked in English, and I was told, nothing, don't speak the English, I'm sorry. And then another man came in the door and they spoke in perfect English and they had a nice conversation together in English. So you see, the world is filled with a lot of hypocrisy of this nature, and we have to be able to rise above it by the education of our vision. not by criticizing or condemning anyone, but by being the masters of ourselves. Let people go. Let them do what they want to do. If they want to do wrong, they will pay for it. If they do right, they will also pay for that. It is not our role to always play the function of the moralist. Sometimes it is our role, and only God can give us the wisdom to know when we should shut up and when we should speak out. There is a time to do each of these in the world. We have to determine that by the balance that is built within us, you see. We call it the quality of diplomacy. And therefore, if we can only learn how to educate our vision, we have come an awful long way in finding God here in this world of form, because it will help us through the education of our vision. And also, when we find God here in the world of form, we're going to find Him also in the formless state, which is beyond. You see, we use the form. Yet form, as Georgie Kepis says, is form cheats function. And this we should realize, that sometimes form cheats the functions of life. And this is a very, very dangerous experience, because it defrauds us of our birthright without our knowing it. Some people say, "'Tis folly to be wise." But I don't think it really is, as long as we are not wise in our own conceits. I don't believe that we should try to garner knowledge for the sake of overcoming someone else. Our knowledge should be so we can overcome the great dragon within ourselves, the chaos in ourselves, and find the divine answers in smoothing out the wrinkles that are in ourselves. Then you see, when people look at us, they will not see a condition that is uneducated, but a condition of true education and culture. And when true education and culture is manifesting in us, it will tend to be reflective. And the first thing you know, they will actually find that it really is manifesting in their relationship with us, and then later in themselves. We are great educators if we function correctly. If we function in the plane of our ego, of the id or the identity, if we seek recognition, we will often not find it. I often think about the experience Jesus described at sitting at the table, where He said, "You stay where you are," basically. He said, "Don't take the chief seats at the tables." He said, "Let the master of the table invite you to the chief seats, and then when you come up, you will know that you are truly honored." We should not seek any experience in life just for the sake of our ego or identity, but we should seek to develop our God realization at all times in the highest aspects of ourselves and the highest aspects of our culture. When we develop these aspects, we will be made to sit at the head of the table because we will deserve to sit there. And that is entirely different. It is a divine experience that a person can willingly enter into because they deserve the experience. And it has to do with the karmic rewards that come to man. Now, I know that many people feel that it is absolutely wrong for anyone to take any kind of reward or to be in any way proud about anything. Yet there is what is known as a false humility. Have you ever seen that false humility in people? I remember one time at the University of Wisconsin, I was a member of the India Association there, and I was actually associated with a great deal of the Indian people. And one time I went to one of their apartments, and I was met at the door with a pronoun by the people. And they gave me this pronoun and great bow, and they said, "Come in, please, Mr. Prophet. So glad to see you. Want to give you tea. Do you take tea? Will you take sugar? Will you take cream? Will you take this or that?" This was the way they talked to me. And I thought they were very lovely people and thought the world of me. About a month later, I met A.J. Devecha, who was the president of the India Society. And he said, I would like to speak with you a minute, Mr. Prophet. I said, fine. He said, let me tell you, Mr. Prophet, that all Indians are not spiritual people. He said, you seem to have the opinion that all Indians are spiritual people. He said, our people are more interested in the materiality of the West than they are in the manifestation of spirituality. And because we have many sages, you think that all Indians are sages, and they are not. He said, the people you've been visiting hate you. And I want to tell you this, and they don't want you to come to their house at all. But you see, they never gave any indication of that, and I often wondered why I got butterflies in my belly every time I would go there. But you see, my inner self knew that I was unwelcome. And if you will learn to educate your vision along certain lines, you will not make the same mistake that I once made many years ago, which I later learned was not really proper at all. Because after all, who of us wants to go where we're not wanted? And of course, who of us would actually wish to be anything that would be an undesirable quality? We don't want an undesirable quality. But overnight you cannot change yourself, so they tell us. I'm not so sure. Probably we can do it in the twinkling of an eye. It says, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, with the sounding of the last trump, the Christ shall appear. Now you see, you have to understand the magic of a moment. And the magic of a moment is really the education of your vision to see him. Because it clearly states, when he shall appear, when he shall appear, when he shall appear. We shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. The apprehension then, or the educating of the vision, to see the Christ as he is tantamount to actually producing the miracle of true selfhood in man. We ask the masters to appear amongst us, and they are quite ready to do so. Yet at the same time, who amongst us today would know how, at this moment, to entertain the great masters? Would we give them food? They would burn it with their staff. Would we give them garments? They would say, I can create my own. Would we give them our love? They would say, I take it. But what actually could we do for them but put on their own garments? It reminds me of Dostoevsky's story of Christ and the leper. We realize that when the figure of the leper appeared to the man, that the man was asked to embrace him. And he said, not so. It was almost like St. Peter's vision, where he said, Lord, I have never eaten anything common nor unclean. I will not eat. Arise, Peter, kill and eat. Kiss this man, Dostoevsky writes. Embrace him, this leper. Put your arms around him. Who among you would like the idea of putting your arms around a repulsive leper? We saw them in India. It was a frightening situation. The ravages of disease. Yet they exist and they are human beings. Now the command comes forth, put your arms around the figure. Arise, Peter, kill and eat. And so we obey. We throw our arms around the leper, and suddenly he melts and becomes a figure of the Christ. This transmutative effort on our part, this acceptance of the law as literal, is inducive itself of the educating of our vision behind the screen of appearances to the plane of reality. And it is absolutely essential to every devotee, if he is to manifest the reality of his presence, that he begin to look behind the appearance screen and see what people really are. Everybody wants to paw over the human rubbish pile. They want to say, at one time she was, at one time he was, the last I knew of him he was a drunkard or a dope fiend or God only knows what that is negative and dilatory. Let us allow people the freedom to express themselves in their higher aspects, rather than confine them to some prison cell of our own creation. When we do that, we also confine ourselves, because others will judge us according to these values. But if we learn to open the prison doors and let the prisoners free, from our own consciousness, our own vision will reflect the God reality of life, and we will begin to see the first beginning or glimmer of cosmic possibilities unto ourselves. And with the understanding that the transmutative effort is a living gift from God, we ourselves will begin to function in the plane of spirit rather than in the plane of matter. And what is matter after all, except the blessed word mater, or mother? I do not wish to create in you the illusion that I despise matter. It is the incorrect use of it that one could almost despise. We are supposed to be free beings, free to express the bounty of the Christ. Yet we ourselves have not, in many cases, been anything but petty creations. Let us then recreate ourselves in the divine image and re-educate our vision to see the Christ in one another and to pass the tests of life that come to every one of us. By the passing of these tests, we not only will give God a chance to act, but we will enable this organization, for example, to function in the plane of humanity and to actually become a good Samaritan to bind up the wounds of the world, to stop the senseless struggle that goes on all around us, and to enable others to engage the teeth of their attention in the divine ideal rather than the human one. Thus will we fashion the reality of Christ. And after all, what is of value or of greater value than these realities? I want everyone to try to realize this for themselves. Throughout this class, we have one meatball, one string, one theme, one dominant reality that we're trying to get across. From time to time, we're going to go back to it. And that is the importance of you as a person unto yourself. And after all, if you have the potential of becoming one with the universe, you literally become the universe. Some of you may recall the late Paramahansa Yogananda writing the story of Lahiri Mahasaya and how he actually had the drama with the 7 drops of oil, the dead man, and the chela. I think it is a very interesting story in a way. Here's a man who dies of cholera or plague. Here's his friend panicking. He runs quickly to the master, who was an ordinary-looking man, and I actually handled his egg or ashes with my hands and put my fingers also into his shoes. And it was a most interesting experience. So here we are now in India, and we find the dead man, and he goes to the master, and the master says, here's a bottle of oil. Put the 7 drops of oil on his lips, and he'll come back to life from the dead. Well, what happens? He put 6 drops of oil, and it reminded me of Naaman dipping in the river. He put 6 drops of oil, and nothing happened. Not a blessed thing, until the indication of the moment happened, and he actually put the 7th drop on the lips, and then the corpse trembled. And he says, I saw a great ball of light, and Lahiri Mahasaya appeared to me. And here I am among the living. Well, these beautiful experiences, which we hear recounted from time to time, are very glamorous in their own right. But I think in reality there are more rich and even beautiful experiences than pulling a man back from the dead. There are the experiences of pulling the living upward into the ascension so that they never will die. Do you know that some people in this earth have never died and have ascended without dying at all? Oh, they died in other lives. But in their final life, they actually made the ascension in the light. They literally disappeared and left the white ash behind. In some cases, they didn't even leave the ash because there was no residue. They function in such a manner as to literally follow Jesus in the regeneration. Now, I don't believe in kidding people. I don't believe in fooling people. There are very few who will go that route. Many people go the route of death and ascend after they have died. Some are reborn. Some are bodhisattvas, or people who come back to this earth and remain on this earth hopefully until the last one of us makes the ascension. God doesn't skim off all the cream. He doesn't take everyone upward because everyone doesn't want to go upward, you see. Some of the people prefer to stay here and help people. And I think this is necessary. But I also think there may come a time in the life evolution of anyone where they will want an ongoingness of being. And so the education of the vision is important. I hope that every one of you will recognize this in a personal application. Let your vision of things around you increase through habit. Do you know why you have limitation? Because of habit. Do you know why you don't notice different things that you should notice? Because of habit. Learn to watch your thoughts. Learn to watch the play of those thoughts. Learn to watch the limitations. You say, I can't do that. I can do that. It is your sense of I can or I can't that makes the difference in what you are. So the education of the vision is a very personal one. It belongs to each person. Through the correct education of your vision, you can actually make your ascension in the light. Through the education of your vision, you can actually follow the Christ in the regeneration. Someone may say, well, I rather like that. I'm going to start in tomorrow and reorganize my pocket secretary. And it wouldn't be a bad idea sometimes. If it doesn't work just right or it doesn't apply to you, go ahead. In humblest beginnings, great endings are made. But for heaven's sakes, don't do nothing about it. Begin the education of your vision now. After all, it is your own life. Or is it? And it is in one sense, and in one sense it isn't, because Jesus one time said, now you see me, and a little while later you won't see me at all. And they said to themselves, what does he mean? Now you see me and now you won't see me. And so, in dealing with this matter here, you can apply it that way. I mean, these little things, very little things, are often instrumental in bringing about a renovation of our consciousness. And the education of our vision is one of these. But let us not make it simply a reserved situation of where we're going to do it someday. Let's make it an act that starts right now and that never ends. Because the education of your vision is a never-ending process. You ought to remember the words always and consider that it is a divine act, or that it can be a divine act, that it can make a different person out of you, one who is able to assimilate more, simply because you have an educated vision. Won't you make this your goal? Let us try. This is the secret of our success.